Hi all. For the introduction of our guest tonight, I was planning to start by recounting all the nominations and awards that she has received so far. But it turned out that there are so many that it will take half of the Q&A to name them. And she's still so young. So we can't wait to talk to our guest tonight and find out what fairy dust was sprinkled over her and see if she can spare some for us. So tonight, on behalf of the New York Film Academy and myself, let's welcome the amazingly talented actress, Carey Mulligan.
Hi. So scared of the technology, but I'm on. Hello.
Yes, exactly. So, hi, Carey.
Hi.
Hi. So nice of you to come here in between all the red carpet celebration of this week. We are not going to ask you who you're wearing tonight, but we will. Well, we will ask you a lot of questions about your fabulous movie, She Said, and about your work in general. But first, how did you start in the business?
So I started when I was 18. I'd never done anything. I wanted to sort of work as a teenager when I was at school, but my parents were sort of adamant that wasn't the right move. So I didn't have any kind of access. And then when I was 18, I was in a gap year. I had applied to...
You were in a what?
A gap year, so like a year out after finishing high school.
Sure.
And I applied to a bunch of drama schools in London and not gotten into any of them. And was sort of kicking around trying to figure out what to do. And I had met one actor in my life who's called Julian Fellowes, who was also a writer who wrote Gosford Park. I wrote to Julian and I said, as you're the only actor I've ever met, what's your advice to someone who's been rejected from all the drama schools? And he was the person who ultimately ended up introducing me to the first person I ever auditioned for, which was a casting director called Gina J, and her assistant Robin was meeting lots of young girls for Pride and Prejudice, the Joe Wright film, and that was the first job I got. So I just got an agent through that and then started working. Okay,
so first of all, what do you mean you couldn't get into any kind of drama school? What's the disconnect here?
So I went to RADA, Central, Lambda. I auditioned for these drama schools. I remember I did a piece from Sarah Kane's Psychosis 448. It was incredibly, as you can imagine, taxing and raw. And I just don't think I had any kind of, I don't know. I just remember seeing everyone else and thinking, wow, these guys are really good. And I didn't get as much as a callback from most of them. I got one callback from one of them. One of them told me to become a television presenter because they thought I was better suited maybe to TV presenting, which is so odd because I'm awful at sort of public speaking. But it just sort of completely nosedived the whole thing. And I was sort of then left without, and all of my peers, everyone I went to school with had gone to university or was going to go to university. So I was sort of the only person who'd applied to drama school, but also not gotten into any of them. So then I started thinking about ways in which I could sort of get an audition somehow for something without having to go to drama school.
So you did write a letter to Julian Fellowes. That was very, great for somebody who's 18.
Yeah, I mean, I had met him when he came to the school. I was the head of drama, which was, I had a little badge. And he was so nice, and his wife was so lovely, and so we had a conversation, and so there was like we had I don't know if you probably even didn't remember me, but we had definitely sort of interacted at school at that event. And then he and his wife had received lots of letters like this from actors and writers and directors and people who were sort of young. So they decided to knock it all out in one go and had a big dinner at a restaurant in London, invited all of us in one sitting. So like 10 of us, all between the age of like 18 and 20 something. And they sort of passed out advice to all of us in various ways. And the two things that I got from that dinner was they directed me towards this theatre sort of club class at Riverside Studios, which is a theatre in London, which was kind of one of the first times I ever acted with boys, because I went to an all-girls school. So I was, and from people from all different walks of life, because I'd gone to, a boarding school in the countryside. So I had a very limited kind of experience. And then also they said there is a new version of Pride and Prejudice, and they're looking for people who haven't necessarily acted much before. They want people to feel like they haven't, not like child actors. And I looked really young at that point. And so I auditioned for Kitty Bennett, and that was the first job that I got. And that casting director forwarded my tape to my agent, who's still my agent now, who started sending them. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I watched An Education again, and it is still so good. To just say, well, it still holds up, doesn't give it any justice, because it's really just so resonates still, and it's so fabulous. And I realized that the two Oscar nominations that you received so far were for movies directed by women.
Yeah.
And but in 2008 or 2009, when you did it, I mean, it was quite rare, I think, for women directors, and for you to even, have faith in a women director. I know you just was so happy to just get the job, but
delighted to have a job. I've always felt, particularly now or in the last couple of years, if you're getting a script from a woman, but I just know there's been about 5 more hoops to jump through at least. So I've always taken it more seriously, because I've always thought, well, that must mean they've reached, because I do think the standards have to be higher. That's just been historically sort of, you've seen some real mediocrity come out of male directors that's been awarded in a way that a sort of similar level film from a woman hasn't. And I've always sort of, so I've loved the experiences I've had, and really incredible stories and really wonderful kind of collaborative experiences.
No, and promising young women especially. I mean, it was so risky, and because the film was so audacious and it was so risky. If it was like the wrong tone, the whole movie was just toast, and yet, you just went for it, and it was just, a spectacular movie, and you were nominated again. So you took some risks, and they really paid off for you.
Well, I think with Emerald, I think the script was a risk, but that actually, as soon as I met Emerald, I didn't feel like I was taking any risks, because I think, without her being the director, I think it would have been a very different experience. She was the one that made it. I just didn't feel, I knew that it was a tightrope walk to direct that script and to get the tone right, and then the minute we sat down and we started talking, and I understood her sense of humor and her aesthetic, and it just all suddenly felt like a no-brainer. But yeah, when I first read it, I thought this could be a complete disaster in the wrong hands. But she's so one in a million, and I knew that she could deliver it.
Amazing. So let's get to She Said, which I think is really an important movie, and we'll get to it a little later on. I know that you and Zoe are friends, and I'm just curious, did she get cast first because supposedly she is categorized as the lead, and then it led to you? Was it really vice versa?
I think it was almost simultaneous, but I remember them saying to me, "Do you know, or have you worked with Zoe before?" So they were sort of working it all out as they went along. And I think but it hadn't been when I read it, the first person I thought of was Zoe, because I just thought she would be extraordinary. And we had acted together years ago and are really good friends in real life. So it was sort of we kind of felt like we'd won the lottery every day that we got to act together, because she was a bridesmaid at my wedding, you know. So to get to be in something together, when you get to act with a friend, it's so fun. But particularly when you get to play a partnership on screen, we're not just in the same film in proximity, we're actually playing sort of partners who are working together, and that felt very lucky.
Yes. You know, there is another very famous investigating journalist duo, and of course I'm talking about All the President's Men, and for which I had somewhat of a front seat. And I remember Carl Bernstein telling us that he and Bob Woodward worked very differently. Bob Woodward would come out, be direct and confrontive. We are the Washington Post, and we are investigating your work on Watergate, and we know that you did blah, 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 blah. And Carl will be totally cagey and say, well, I understand you don't want to talk to us, but can I have a glass of water? So is there the same kind of, do you think the same kind of thing played here with you and Zoe?
I think to a degree, I mean, I think they took different roles. Meghan had a lot of experience in the past of speaking to women. And I think, you know, one of the reasons they first connected was Jodi asking her advice on how she had done that and what had been an effective way of doing that. But when it came to this investigation, and certainly the way that it was portrayed in the film, but which was, you know, true to life, was that Meghan was sort of more focused, or sort of they divided and conquered in a way that Meghan became the person that was really taking on the kind of men behind Weinstein. And there was something that she kind of relished about that. I think that she, and a lot of the conversations we had, I was trying to wrap my head around how she wasn't scared all the time. And she really wasn't, you know, she really just sort of, I think she saw a lot of it, you know. I think she's someone who sees her career as a vocation, not a job. This is something that she feels kind of called to do, and that these confrontations or you know, scenes with these men are, you know, it's sort of, she gets energy from them. They're not something that she walks into with fear. So particularly with Weinstein, and she was the person, as it happens in the film, but when Weinstein sort of stormed the offices on that day, she was very willing to go and be the person that sort of sat and listened to him and listened to his lawyers, and wasn't nervous for that experience, and just sort of knew that by him being there, they had already won in a way. So Jodi did do, and Jodi, but also Meghan had a very small child, so couldn't travel. So Jodi was the one who went to the UK, met Zelda, met Laura Madden, and did the parts of the investigation that were more focused on the survivors.
I felt that she won them a little bit with empathy and patience, and you were like, I know your game.
Yeah,
I'm gonna get you.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I talked to her about there's this very famous interview with Emily Maitlis on Newsnight with Prince Andrew that, you know, aired a couple of years ago, where she sort of you know, there's sort of the big official interview, and it was sort of, everyone said it was, you know, it kind of hit the newspapers as a kind of catastrophe of an interview, because it did the reverse of what I think the intention was from Prince Andrew in terms of, but the style in which Emily Maitlis interviews him reminded me a lot of the way in which Meghan sort of took on these powerful men, is that a lot of it is just letting them talk. And a lot of them, and there is an element to, without trivializing what they're talking about in any way, she did describe it sort of as a game, you know, somewhat of a game of battleship, you know, where there's a strategy to the way in which you approach those conversations, and it varies from person to person, and you kind of, particularly with someone like Lanny Davis, who's played so brilliantly by Peter Friedman in the film, you know, there was a mode of communication with him that was different to the way she communicated with other people like Lance Mayerov and Weinstein.
Do you, when you do a movie that is based on real life and real character, do you still able to put some of yourself in it, in that character?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's sort of crucial because I mean, I think the biggest mistake we could have made with this film is trying to sort of impersonate the real people. And Zoe and I talked about that really early on. I think largely because the subject matter was so real and so vividly and painfully real to so many people, and that we had actual survivors in the film, you know, portraying themselves, like Ashley Judd, and portraying other characters. I think if there had been any sort of element of sort of us acting around them, it might have felt distracting. So we wanted to sort of blend in a way, not in a, you know, just to try and sort of be a part of what could hopefully feel more like a kind of documentary or something that just didn't feel like two actors performing. So that meant throwing out, Meghan has a very particular pattern of speech. I spent a long time sort of playing around with that and playing around with her dialect and trying to sort of mimic the way in which she speaks, which is nothing like the way I speak. And after a while, that just became obvious that would just be, people would go, oh, that's that actress trying to do a thing, and then which pulls you out of the film. So both of us realized we weren't going to do that. I mean, we dressed like them. We, you know, we wanted to know all about their sort of habits in the work. Meghan talked about being someone who sits at her desk with her legs up on her desk. Jodi that, you know, the food that they bring into the office, you know, all of the kind of their backpacks, their phones, what they do with their phones in interviews, what do they drink, what do they, you know, all of that stuff we kind of wanted to borrow. But then it was just about, well, what's the essence of this person, and, you know, how can I portray her as faithfully as possible without trying to sort of mimic anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed also, especially in the scene where you're saying, what do we have here? What's the case? And Zoe is saying, we have, you know, the scene that you're showing everybody. We have kids, you know, sexual, but, you know, you didn't have makeup. It was really, it just focused on really what was going on at that point. It was like working women who are so focused on what is the case here? What do we have? I think what the movie also showed to many people, because it also applies to even acting or anything else, where it all looks so glamorous and fabulous, but then you realize how much work goes into it, and how really you have no case unless you have verification.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think I'm gonna start with the students and give them you know, a chance to ask some questions, and then, you know, you and I will also can get back at the end, and so on and so forth. So Mike, do we have questions from the students?
We do. We have a question from Lily Malm. Lily, we've enabled you to unmute yourself. What is your question for Carey?
Hi, first of all, I loved your performance in the film. It was so empowering to watch, especially that scene when you yell at that guy in the bar. It was super empowering. As we all know, a lot of things have changed in the industry since Me Too first broke out, but what, in your opinion, would be a crucial next step in order to eliminate sexism in the industry?
Yeah, I think it's that. I think it's that, you know, I think what Zoe and I talked about, and that we've been around for a bit longer doing it, although it doesn't feel like it, still feels like we've just started, but is that I think the biggest change for us is feeling like we're sort of there. You know, my hope going onto the set would be that I would look around and see things the way that they should be and should have always been, but particularly now. But there will always be an intimacy coordinator that, you know, that we see that, you know, women are being treated. I mean, some of this behavior that happened pre all of these things being put in place is crazy. Zoe and I talked about the idea of doing a fight without a stunt coordinator is madness, but we did intimacy with our intimacy coordinator for, you know, 18 years. So I think a lot of that needs to be upheld, and that we need to keep that in place, because I think movements can happen very quickly and then, you know, lose traction. In terms of where we go forward, I think we're seeing it. I mean, I do, you know, I'm an optimist, and I do think this year shows a kind of remarkable array of brilliant female characters, female directors. I'm not, not necessarily being perhaps recognized in the same way, and that probably could do with some progress. But I think in general, baby steps are happening, and it's really it's got to start from the top down. I think it's got to start with the right people being given opportunity at a very early level, and that really does come from sort of the bigger powers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have another question here. This one is from Fatima Romero from our LA campus. Fatima, we've enabled you to unmute yourself. What is your question for Carey?
Hi, so I love your performance in Promising Young Woman, and I also love your monologue. I always audition with it, so I was wondering if you could give me any tips on how to prepare for it and how to like really nail it.
Gosh, that's so funny. I completely I read it and I thought, when I finished the script, I thought this is the most incredible piece of writing, and I was so excited to do it. And I did that thing, which I don't know if any of you guys have ever done, but somehow you just kill the audition scene. Like it just goes to nothing. And I thought of it very much as the scene that I'm very privileged to be offered the script without auditioning for it, but I always thought of it as, well, this would be the audition scene. So this is the one that like the movie hangs on, and I have to get it right. And if I don't get it right, like the film's dead. And it got to the day of shooting it, and I just hated every single take that we did, and I just couldn't. Poor Chris had to lie there with his arms handcuffed to the bed for hours because I just kept on asking Emerald for another take, and I just felt like I couldn't get it. And then she said, she was trying to sort of help me get to where I wanted to be, and she was like, "You want to cry, don't you?" So just cry. And I was like, "Well, I don't think I do want to cry, because I don't know. It went around and round and round, and I was so miserable with how it went. And but I think it's because anyway. So that's all to say. I think I screwed it up on the day, but I remember when I was thinking about it beforehand, I had sort of found a way I think it's all about, I don't know, I'm not an acting teacher, I'm terrible at this, but I found that when I made Nina, someone incredibly close to me in my life, like fully for the first time, it completely sang to me, the whole thing made sense. And I think because I discovered that too early, I wish I discovered it on the day, and I think it would have worked better. But because I thought about it too far ahead of time, I kind of overthought the whole thing and went wrong. But I think, deeply personalizing it, because she's putting her whole life on the line for the memory of someone, for the justice of, for justice to be served. And I think, you can't underestimate the stakes of that. And so it has to be someone that you literally die for. So identifying that person in your life, and kind of, it's for that person that you're saying, and the words are coming out of your mouth. That was my idea going into the scene, and then I just got in my own head and completely ruined it. But Emerald saved me in the edit, I think, on that one.
It's a monologue.
Yeah.
I don't know.
We have a question here from Sharon Zucker from our New York campus. Sharon, we've enabled you to unmute yourself. What is your question for Carey?
Hi, Carey. Oh my God, this is so exciting. I've been following your work for a while, and it's absolutely astonishing. Seeing She Said, Promising Young Woman, and all the way to Suffragettes, you've been taking part in some major, very unique and important roles in storytelling regarding women. And this might have some weight and responsibility, and I was just wondering what's the process behind it, and if there is any.
Yeah, I tend to, I'm sort of fairly intuitive about the jobs that I do. It's generally like on the first read. I don't ever sort of have a big, with Promising, I read the script, thought this could be amazing or it could be awful, depending on who's in charge, and then met Emerald, and it sort of immediately fell into place. Suffragette felt like a story that just deserved to be told, and I couldn't believe that it had not been told, and that if it had been about men, there'd be like 50 versions of the film already. So that was the, and similarly, she said, you know, they did ignite a movement that has changed our world, at least, you know, and hopefully the reach is beyond that. But so they've never been sort of massively thought out things, but I suppose they are, you know, they are connected, and all female directors, which has also been a blessing. But I think the part of it, the only part of it that sticks for me or gets challenging is the press. I relish making a film. I absolutely believe in and love the stories, and then you come to the press part of it, and I just curl up with all of anxiety, because it just feels like there's a million sort of potholes to fall down. And I equally, you know, I'm an actor, and I do think that women, female actors who make films that have feminist, you know, well, feminist is such a ridiculous, you know, it's a film that's about a woman that's portrayed accurately, I think is a feminist film, but that, you know, you then become sort of an advocate or a spokesperson for feminism, and therefore if you say one thing wrong, you know, you're sort of, so I find the responsibility of that nerve-wracking, and particularly when making films about survivors. I'm extraordinarily lucky to have not experienced you know, a serious trauma in my life. Everyone, I think, every woman I know has experienced in some version, some infraction of that in their own lives. But, you know, when we're talking about real trauma, the stuff that we cover in Promising, as she said, I feel like a huge responsibility to be respectful and sensitive to that, and that is people's real life and real experience. So that feels weighty, and that sometimes feels sort of, it's, you know, it's an incredible privilege, but also does feel like a sort of weight of responsibility to just get it right and not, you know, and not do a disservice to anyone.
Thank you so very much.
Answers your question, but that, yeah.
We do have a question here from Andrew Ognarognikov. Andrew's asking what your biggest personal discovery after becoming an actress was, and if you noticed any changes in your character and maybe some limits to yourself.
Oh, wow. I mean, I think the biggest personal discovery, probably that probably for a long time that I was much more comfortable working than I was sort of doing anything else. I think that's changed since I had children now, and that's, and met my husband and had kids and all that stuff. But for a long time, it was sort of air, and you know, if I didn't work, I just couldn't breathe. And I felt much more, yeah, I sort of felt a little bit, you know, not to play a small violin, but I felt a little bit like not totally in anywhere as a child and as a teenager and into my late teens. And then I started working, and I was suddenly like, oh, I joined the circus. I'm in the circus, and the circus is where I should have been the whole time. And that felt very, but then I was sort of addicted to the circus and couldn't bear. I would be like 3 weeks off finishing a job and would think, what's the next thing? If I don't know what the next thing is, and for, you know, a good 5 or 6 years, I just went from one thing to the next. And then I sort of, yeah, then I hit a different balance in my life, which is just probably age and experience and family. But it's not the air anymore. But it's, you know, it's wonderful and my favorite thing. And in some ways a lot easier than family life sometimes. But yeah, I think it sort of gave me a place that felt like very sort of comfortable. I always just wanted to live at summer camp when I was a kid, and that's what acting and, you know, work has always felt like to me, which seems outrageous as a job, but it, you know, always felt like if the job is really good, the theatre play is really good, or if the film is really good, it feels like you're at summer camp and you have the best time ever, and it's that horrible thing on the last day of summer camp and you know you won't see those people maybe ever again. That's what the job, I think, ultimately feels like to me.
Well, thank you.
Thank
We
you.
have a question here from Anne Moore from our LA campus. What Anne is asking is, what is your approach to character? Meaning, what is the first thing you do after reading your script for the first time?
I think it just varies, I suppose. There's been, I don't think there's ever been like 2 ways where I've done the same thing. I mean, truly, I did a film called Wildlife that my friend Paul Dano directed, And my preparation was literally just flying to Montana. I mean, then I just, because I just had a very small child and it was all happened quite quickly. And I don't know, for whatever reason, I think I said to Paul, like, and he just said, we'll just come, and we just did it. And, and that was one thing. And then because it was Paul and because it was an incredible script and I had Jake and amazing actors, it was fine. There's been other times when I just did this film with Bradley Cooper about Leonard Bernstein and his wife. And we worked on that for years together. And, we went to Philadelphia and we narrated one of Bernstein's operas together. And, I went to Chile and I met her family. And, so I think it's sort of so case by case. But I think one thing that always connects is I always have music that is, I always sort of identify a playlist of music that is that person. And so on my phone, on my Spotify, I have like Nina and Felicia and, all of these different, I had a Nina playlist for Promising Young Woman, which was all the music that I associated between Cassie and Nina, and those were all of their songs. And then, for Meghan, and she said, I actually asked Meghan for her most listened to, like her wrap up Spotify list of 2020 to see what she had been listening to. And that has been a kind of recurrent theme, but everything else is kind of malleable and also depends very much on who the director is and how they work. I'm sort of, I always feel like I've signed up to work with the boss, and if they are going to take it in a certain direction, I'm kind of quite happy to go with the play.
Excellent. We have a question here from Cami Lloyd. Cami, we've enabled you to unmute yourself. What is your question for Carey?
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Such a big fan. Thank you so much for being here. And so mine was kind of similar to Sharon's, but when you look for projects, do you find yourself solely looking for projects that you're initially passionate about, or as you learn about them and become more passionate as you dive into the role? So like, how much do you personally need to be interested in order to be a part of a project?
Oh, totally. I think my sort of dream is reading something and being immediately enamored with it and everything about it. And I don't, that I just want to sort of jump in and start doing it straight away. I've had a couple of experiences in the past of sort of tentatively coming on board early to a book or a piece of writing or something and starting to sort of theoretically produce, but not really, but just sort of be a part of development. And I've regrettably and embarrassingly pulled out of almost all because I get bored. And I just sort of think, well, I've made it in my head, and I don't, I just want it to sort of be this like perfect Christmas present that you open up and go, oh, how wonderful, and do it. So I don't get much joy out of the kind of process side of things. But yeah, mostly it's just a no-brainer. It just is in either a very easy no or a very easy yes. With a slight thing in the back of my mind of like not wanting to tread over old territory or repeat myself, not thematically as much. I mean, clearly from all the feminist films I've made, but more just in terms of the characters. I think Cassie in Promising Young Woman is a completely different animal to Meghan, who is totally different to Maud and Suffragette. They're all, touching on the same stuff, but they are completely different styles of film and different characters. But I did make a slight rule at some point that I wanted to stop crying in films because I felt like I was becoming associated with crying and everything. That's probably.
Well, thank you so much. Who's next?
We have a question here. This one's from Josephine Berglund. Josephine, we've enabled you to unmute yourself. What is your question for Carey?
Hi, Carey. Thank you so much for being here. I'm a young woman filmmaker / writer, and I was wondering if you have any techniques to your performance when it comes to handling the serious topics like in She Said in Promising Young Woman.
I think it's changed a lot. I think I've figured out that there's sort of, I think probably, I remember the first time I had to like cry on camera was in Pride and Prejudice, and I remember sort of psyching myself up in the corner into a complete paddy, trying to sort of summon emotion to cry. Even though it was a very silly scene, I wanted to have actual tears. And I think that's changed a lot now. I feel a lot more I think the more I interact with the cast and the crew, I don't sort of tend to retreat anymore. I don't think it's helpful to sort of withdraw. I think it makes you sort of tense up and then you kind of can't access anything. So I kind of tend to sort of just stick around. I don't ever go to a trailer. I want to just be there, standing by, and prefer to just be with the other actors. And I think just staying in things as much as you can and not kind of, I think there's something that breaks. In fact, on Maestro, the thing I did with Bradley, he, which I was very excited about because it was a big film and I've done largely lots of little films. I thought, oh, finally I'm doing big films. It's quite exciting. And then he called me up before we started shooting and said, I don't want to spend any money on trailers because we're never going to be in. So do you mind if we're in a triple banger for the whole thing? Oh, what? My Hollywood movie. But
That's Bradley Cooper. People don't know which Bradley you're talking about.
On the trailers, which I do respect, but I was quite excited to have a fancy trailer for once. But yeah, so I think it's just about sort of staying in the, I think it's, you've got to treat it like a play or something, you know, there is like a certain sort of something to being with people and not sort of, and then with the serious stuff, which a lot of these films are, there has to be a certain amount of levity. I don't think you can live in a serious cloud all day with a serious face, because subject matters of these things, you know, you've got to be respectful about that, but you can't take yourself that seriously. But, you know, we're storytellers at the end of the day.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll definitely keep that in mind.
Thank you.
Talking about levity, I know that you also, your next movie is with Adam Sandler, but it's a sci-fi. Would you ever do an out and out comedy?
100%. Yeah. I mean, I yes, totally. But no one's ever offered me.
Even after you stop crying, they still do that.
Still. No, I tell you, it's so funny every time I say, I did this thing with Adam Sandler in lockdown. They're like, and I'm like, no, like Uncut Gems, Adam Sandler, like, you know, obviously not in Murder Mystery 3, much as I'd love to be. But no, totally, I do, and it's just sort of character based and story based, and I've never kind of come across, or nor have I been offered the kind of thing that would be right for me. But I definitely, you know, want to sort of go all over the map in terms of, yeah,
fun.
Just doing dramas forever.
I'd like to see that one. I'm gonna wait for the comedy.
Okay, it's coming. Sitcom, probably.
Okay, Mike, who else do we have?
Yes, we have a question here from Courtney Ravello from our LA campus. Courtney, we've enabled you to unmute yourself. What is your question for Carrie?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Really quick, I just want to say this is like a dream come true. You're my favorite actress. I'm like obsessed with you. All of your movies that you're in are my favorite. Never Let Me Go, Suffragette, Promising Young Woman, She Said, Pride and Prejudice. I'm just a huge fan. And you're welcome. I just really respect what you do. But anyway, I'm an actor at NYFA, and I'm also a woman. And I wanted to know if you had any advice on like speaking up on set when you're new and like trying to get your feet wet and don't really have a name out there yet. Like, how do you like have boundaries and kind of speak up for yourself and command respect in a room?
That's such an interesting question. I think I definitely struggled with that for a long time because I felt like I'd sort of won some sort of prize. I first, you know, was on set, so I don't think I felt very unqualified because I had been so, in my mind, kind of dramatically rejected from drama school. So I felt like, well, I'm pretty lucky to be here, so I'll keep my mouth shut. And that might have gone on for a bit too long. But I think, yeah, I think you're you know, if you're there because you are needed and wanted as part of the production. And I do think that things have shifted dramatically. I worked on some projects back in the day when I started sort of 18 years ago, where it definitely felt like there were men being listened to who were in the same level as me professionally, but were men and were, you know, was certainly having their voices heard in a way that mine didn't. I don't think that is quite the case now. I hope it's not. I do think for women, one of the best things to come out of the last 5 years has been like a real camaraderie that I didn't feel necessarily was there before. I've been lucky and worked with really wonderful women. Also, working on films like Suffragette and Pride and Prejudice, we really were sort of a proper gang. But, there has been something where for a long time, I think actresses were kind of pitted against one another so much that they didn't feel like such a community. Whereas now, I think everything that happened post Me Too has meant that there is more of a kind of, I would expect walking onto a set with women now that would feel like more of a kind of sisterhood and community than there was back in the day, and that would automatically afford you a place in the room and an ability to be heard that you might not have had, as this person starting out 15, 20 years ago. So I think that's changed. And also just knowing that you were there because, someone always said to me, like, you can't be nervous of auditions. They're desperate for you to be the one that's right. And it's true that every time you walk into audition, they're thinking, for the most part, they're thinking, it'd be great if this person was the person that we, the person we're looking for, because then we can just all go home. And I think it's true. I think once you've got that and you're in the room, you've earned your place. And but I think the sets are generally now a place that are a lot more receptive to everyone having a say, and particularly when it comes to anything that is, untoward or not right. I think there's channels that opened up there that are a lot easier for everyone, and sets generally do feel much, much more, secure and safe and open. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, it did.
Yes, you did.
And thank you for doing this Q&A. We really appreciate it.
No, thank you.
We have a question here from Jessica Jane Goundry. Jessica, we've enabled you to unmute yourself. What is your question for Carey?
Hi, Carey.
Hi.
Fellow Brit here.
Hello.
Except it's 2:50 in the morning for me. But
Yeah.
I love you. Huge fan. So had to jump on there.
Thank you.
I just want to say your portrayal in Promising Young Woman was just so hauntingly beautiful and raw and really hit very close to home for me. So yes, I just want to thank you for that. But I'm a aspiring producer / director, and I was just wondering, what do you look for in a project? What does the director or team have to do to help you give a performance that blows people away that you provide?
I think for the most part, I think a really, really important part is the kind of cohesive set, that a director and a producer that are a proper team. So I've been on sets where there's been conflict between director, producer, cinematographer, and it really permeates the whole set. You think that there's a way that it can be separate and that the actors will, can be sheltered from it, and it just absolutely doesn't work. It's like, and this won't mean anything to the Americans, but it's like an episode of The Archers, like every and so there's, you an actor sense that, and it really does sort of throw the balance of everything off, and kind of, for everyone, for the whole crew, it's just not a nice place to work. So I do think the director and the producer being completely aligned, and obviously there's always going to be conflict, but if it, to buffet that from the crew and from the cast as much as possible. And then I think, like with Emerald, she just had the most, you should get her to do this, she's so brilliant, but she just had the most crystal vision of what she wanted. Not in a way that was sort of dictating anything, and not that there felt like there was any lack of freedom in what any of us could do, but just I could see it, like she just had the whole thing in her head, and that's how she writes as well. And she's, for any of you that are writers, and she's got this ridiculous process where she just sort of thinks it for 2 or 3 years, and she's probably talked, I don't know if you've seen interviews where talking about this, but she will literally think through the whole story for years, 2 years. I think Promising was 2 or 3 years, and then one day she'll just write the whole thing down. I think the script that I read was like the second draft, and that was it. There were no previous drafts. So that's kind of incredible. But yeah, I think, Emerald had an absolutely crystal vision. Maria on She Said did. I think that, and you want someone that you can kind of, I had an amazing producer on Maestro, this film that we just wrapped, Christy McCusker-Krieger, who's Steven Spielberg's producer, and she produced this for Amblin and for Bradley. And, she's just such a completely unflappable person, the most secure, safe pair of hands. And when you've got her and you've got a director like Bradley was, and these other guys I mentioned, it's sort of someone that you can look at after a take, and if they give you a nod, that's sort of it, and you can move on. You don't have to sort of, torture yourself doing it a million times. And ultimately, the scene that I massively struggled with in Promising, eventually Emerald just had to say, like, trust me. And the second she said that, I was just let it go. So it's such a trust thing. And I think that does come from people who are very secure in the vision of what they're making, the reason they're making it.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
We have a question here from India Spalvieri. India, we've enabled you to unmute yourself. What is your question for Carey?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Carey. I'm a really huge fan of you. When I heard that you were doing a Q&A, I couldn't believe my eyes, because really, huge fan. I love all of your movies, especially Promising Young Woman and She Say.
Thanks.
I have a very simple question, but for me, it will really help me. If there is like any particular acting advice or tip that you use for yourself early in your career that helped you a lot, especially before an audition.
Well, as I said in the previous question, I do think there's something to knowing that you can essentially solve someone's problem by being the right person. So in terms of auditions, I do think there's an element of, there's confidence to be had from knowing that it's not kind of X Factor, or then American Idol. They're not trying to sort of, there's no gain anything from you doing badly. They're only going to gain from you doing well. And I do think that's and also to trust your casting. It's interesting now. There's been the occasional time in the last while where, well, for instance, on Promising Young Woman, we met a couple of different people for Beau's character, and extraordinary actors, and actors that you would know and that I really admire. And when they're coming in to read, like do chemistry reads, I couldn't believe they were doing it, and I was so excited. Incredible actors. And then Beau walked into the room, and it was just done. There was just no one else who could do it. And the film with those different people would have been a totally different film, maybe a different film, but I can't imagine anyone apart from Beau doing it. But I was sort of blown away by the people who had read or had done this chemistry reading, but they just weren't Beau. He just fitted that exact puzzle piece of humor and tallness, and it was just like this completely unique combination. And for someone, you will walk into that room and be that completely unique combination. And I think that's to understand that it's not like an acting competition. It's not who's the best actor necessarily, even though I'm sure you are the best actor, but it's much more kind of chemical than that. It's a lot more, I don't know if anyone's seen that and listened to that podcast, Dead Eyes. But there's this whole podcast about a guy who was fired from what's that show, Band of Brothers, that Steven Spielberg directed an episode. He was fired from that episode because he was told that he had dead eyes, and he spent sort of 20 years thinking about what that meant, and then he finally interviews Tom Hanks, and Tom Hanks is like, I don't know, like it literally could have meant anything. And I think that's the case with I went to a room and they could say, her cheeks are too weird, or like it just immediately there can be something that's just fires wrong with the director's brain, but there equally can be a million things that fire right. So just trusting that, like, also if you didn't get something, it's not because you're not great, it just means that you're not that perfect Bo Burnham puzzle piece for that one thing, but you might be the next thing tomorrow.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Really, you made my day. Thanks for the question. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Now it's time to close. I just want to ask you one question that is just so off the wall. Your husband is a very successful musician. You are a very successful actress. Who do you think has more fun?
Oh, he does. 100%. 100%. I don't know how, but I mean, it's just his job is so fun. But also, I could never do his job in a million years. I tried to sing. For the Coen Brothers movie I did, Inside Llewyn Davis, we had a concert where we all had to sing songs from the movie. And it was the worst 5 minutes of my entire life.
So you're not going to come back as a singer very soon?
Never. I mean, you couldn't pay me enough money. It's just horrific. But yeah, his job is so much fun. He's been to set like twice in 11 years and maintains it's the most boring thing he's ever done. Which, to be fair, if you're a visitor on set, you know,
right.
It's boring.
Yeah. Unless you're so invested in it that everything is just so amazing. I just want us to say something, because the article of the New York Times, the book, which was a bestseller, the movie, they're all a huge part of one of the biggest changes in the industry and in the workplace in centuries. I mean, I'm from the, from the 80s and 90s. It was just it was so different. So kudos for you that you committed to that part. Kudos to you that you committed to come here for a Q&A. We met, and I told you a little bit about it. You say, I'm going to do it. And then you went over to your PR and says, I want to do it. And you did it. And that's it. You didn't waver. You didn't change your mind. You didn't try to push in one of the most unpredictable period of scheduling when you are, running the award season. And that shows a lot of character, and it shows a lot of discipline. And I think that talent is very important, but I saw in all the successful people the same qualities that I saw in you, which is really about commitment and about keeping your word and, and being disciplined. And so I think that is very big part of, for your success. It's not just about dust, fairy dust. It involves a lot of other qualities, which you have proven that you have. And I just want to say that we can't wait to see more of what you're doing, because you are still so young and you have done so much. And all of it is such good work. And so we are going to be here really cheering for you. I know that even though we have a lot of big names in that Q&A, when, we announced that you are coming, I mean, there was really such respect and such excitement for you. So I want to thank you again for taking the time in your very, very big schedule to come and help budding students who learned so much from you today. And I want to say thank you again. Namaste.
Oh, thank you so much. Honestly, it's such a pleasure and a privilege. And I just, to be asked amongst all the incredible people that you've interviewed is just a real honor. And I hope I wasn't too inarticulate answering everyone's questions. But yeah, it's just an absolute pleasure. And I'm so glad that we got to talk and that I got to virtually meet some of you, and wishing you all the best for everything.
Thank you so much.